So just in terms of how we're going to interact tonight, all of our audio except for me and Ramona is turned off. So the way that we'll communicate is we have polls. I'll ask some questions and ask you to just post your answer in the chat pod, and we can communicate with that. Also, like we said, if you have a question, just put it in the Q&A, and Ramona will help me to actually do that. And Ramona, if you could let me share my screen, I'll switch it over to my part.
You should be able to. I'm not sure. Are you able to share?
This will stop your screen sharing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Desktop too. Okay, cool. So before we go in, I just want to make sure that you can see what I have. It should say today's roadmap at the beginning. Is that correct? Perfect. Awesome. Great. So this is kind of our plan for today. But before we go into it, I just would like to get a little bit of background in terms of how about the first question? We'll just make this pretty easy. Where are you calling in from, or where are you connecting in from? So I am in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. If you could put that in the chat pod, that would be nice. Oh, someone from Chicago. Thank you, Jen, for joining us. A few other people coming in. Lauderhill, Florida. Excellent. Good, good. Sunrise, Boca, Arlington, Virginia. Awesome. Coconut Creek. Excellent. Okay. And then I'm just kind of, if you were to define yourself as, are you a business owner? Would you consider yourself a leader? Are you an individual contributor? Or are you just curious on the topic about lessons learned from lousy leaders? In the chat pod, I'm just trying to get a sense of, do you own your own company? Do you work for a company? Are you a new entrepreneur? So maybe in just a couple words, describe yourself. That way we just get a sense of who the audience is. Self-employment, business owner, thank you. Okay. Subject matter expert in human resources, future business owner. I love that. Active military franchise owner. Great. Thank you guys for sharing. That helps me out a lot. So our roadmap for today is we'll talk about why you're here. I'll share why I am here. And we'll talk about this concept that I have called lousy leaders. And we'll explain a little bit more on that as we go. But the purpose is, I think there can be a lot of powerful learning and things that we can do just by watching other people make mistakes or do things that are not in a traditional, pure, solid, effective leadership state. So, and also for those of you that stick around to the end, I have some freebies to give you. I have a free online 10-question communication style assessment that helps you understand your style and how you can communicate more effectively with others. And I also have a free ebook on how you can do foolproof development planning. But what I would like you to do is I would like you to take a moment, and you don't need to share names here, but I want you to think about the best leader that you've ever worked with. Maybe it's someone that has inspired you, has motivated you, has seen potential in you. Maybe they were there when you need them. And I'd like to ask if you could share some of the characteristics of that leader that you think is one of the best ever with everybody in the chat pod. And while you do that, I'll share a story of mine. So long time ago, I worked at US Airways, and one of my first projects was I was supposed to sit through 6 weeks of the new hire flight attendant training program and try to find ways to add customer service training. So me and a team of 2 other people, we would fly every day up, go observe the training. I was in Washington, D.C. at the time. And we would create this report of suggestions and recommendations that we wanted to do to make the training more focused on not just safety and technical, but more how do you work with the customer? How do you provide excellent customer service? So I was actually doing a training in New York City, and I got a message. They pulled me out of the meeting and said, the VP would like to talk to you in 3 hours. She wants to know everything you've been doing with this training audit and what recommendations you have. I had never spoken to a vice president in my life before at the time. I was scared, I was nervous, but you know what? In the hour plane ride from New York to DC, I put together a couple slides and I delivered the presentation, and it went really well. And I've always thought of that leader as someone who pushed me, trusted me, had confidence in me, and ripped me out of this training room to go talk to her and do a presentation. So some of the things that were really important for me as a leader, I still remember back, and this has been, my gosh, probably like 20 some years ago. It's a long time. But so going to what you have in your chat pod, good leaders are great listeners, approachable, team oriented, positive, focused on what's best for the greater good of the company. That's so important. That's a really, really good leadership trait, because and we'll talk about this, sometimes we can get hung up where we want to do things that make us look good, that make us feel good, that will give us money or power or whatever. And we don't always keep the end goal of doing good for the company or the specific situation of the organization in mind. So Douglas, thank you for sharing that. Elizabeth, smart, curious, empathetic, non-judgmental, honest, frank. I love it. What else we have? Good leader, good listener. Yeah, awesome. Smart, curious, non-judgmental. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that. And I'll talk about more about this, but we're looking at the dark side of leadership. And I'll share some examples of leaders that you know and you've heard some with. And there's an opportunity to judge, and I'm not suggesting that we're criticizing or judging or looking at kind of the negative side, but we're just exploring, because I think inherently as humans, no one's 100% good and no one's 100% bad. So I ask that with your permission, we try to reserve the judgment from that as we begin to talk and unpack what good leadership looks like and what are the lessons that we can learn from some of these not so wonderful leaders. So great. So now we talked about the good side. Let me take you to the dark side. So think about the worst leader ever. And I would like you to share, please, not the name, not the company, but what are some of the things that made them a lousy leader? And I'll start with an example. I worked for a company, and I worked with someone that was a senior level position, and she always had challenges. She was always crying. It was a very rough environment for her to navigate. And she basically turned in her resignation, and she told me, "Hey, I just quit." And I'm like, "No way. I can't believe you left." She's like, "Yeah. And let's call him Paul. Paul said that I'll always have a job here. I'm always welcome to come back." And then later on that day, Paul said, "I'm so happy that she's gone. She'll never come back here." So it's like not being authentic and not being honest and sort of like spreading rumors. So that was just one of the things that created kind of a bad taste in my mouth. So going to your chat, the worst leader ever, insecure in their role. Oh, takes credit for other people, quick temper. Yeah, domineering, narcissistic, big one. Yes, kind of like the dark side of a Hogan assessment. Yeah, that's one of the tools that I do. So it's kind of like the dark side of leadership instead of the dark side of personality, but a lot of similarities. Good. So those are some really, really good things. I think you have an understanding of some good leadership qualities and some bad leadership qualities. So I'm going to ask Ramona if she can bring up the next poll. Now that you have an understanding of what lousy leadership is beginning to look like, I would like you to answer the poll. And the poll is, how many lousy leaders have you ever worked with? And I know this is kind of a subjective question, but Is it about 10%? Is it about 25%? Would you say it's like every other person is a lousy leader? Is it 75% or over 75%? So just kind of curious, and we're not going to share your individual answers. I'm not going to look at them, but how many leaders have you worked with that you would say that they're pretty lousy? Oh my gosh, I'm watching the numbers come in. I don't know if you guys can see them, but this is interesting.
They can't see them, but I can share the results at the
Yeah,
end.
share
I
them at
just
the
won't
end.
share the
Okay,
names.
good, perfect. The good news is no one is saying over 75% because I would be very concerned if that was the case. So we're going to give you about 5 more seconds. If you could just select one of these options for our first poll, that would be great. And I'm going to write this down too. Okay, let's go ahead and end the poll and share the results. So we have the majority, oh my gosh, 51 to 75. 33% of you said that you're dealing with a lousy leader. And then we have what? 27% is less than 10. And it looks like a 20% tie for up to 25 and 20% for up to 50. Interesting. Wow. So what does that tell us? It tells us that here's my takeaway, and let me know what you think in the chat pod. But there's times where we work with people that are really difficult to work with, and not everyone can be a great leader. Not everyone can be perfect all the time. But there's times, and I'm sure all of you have a story of a leader that you've worked with that did something that just didn't sit right with you or didn't sit right for your company. And it's so important for us to, not be so emotional, but to take some time and actually think through what are some of those lessons that we've learned, and what can we do to kind of apply it and share those learning with other people. So, why is it that we're looking at lousy leadership? As Ramona said, I've been doing leadership development, learning and development for a couple of years now. And everything pretty much is like, these are the good things that you need to be doing. These are what effective leadership looks like. And I was sharing some personal stories, and other people, colleagues, friends, coworkers, were sharing their stories. And I'm like, you know what? I want to write a book on the lessons that we learned from lousy leaders. So this started as I signed up for this webinar a long time ago before I even started writing the book. But part of it is everybody looks at positive leadership. There's a lot of lessons that we can learn by recognizing what we should not do. And that's really the purpose of that. So it's 6:22 Eastern time, so we're gonna pick up the pace just a little bit, and let me tell you what's going to happen in this in the next exercise. So I'm going to give you a couple personal exercises and scenarios. And the first one, you don't have to chat, you don't have to write, but this is a ethical dilemma, and I just want you to answer this. Don't share your answer with everybody, but answer this, and we'll come back to it. So here's the deal. If you knew a woman who was pregnant, she already had 8 children, 3 were deaf, 2 were blind, 1 was mentally retarded, and she had syphilis, would you recommend that she have an abortion? Now, please don't answer. I just want you to hold on to that and think based on this. And I'm not going into ethics or values. This is just a quick yes or a no. Answer this and keep the answer to yourself. All right. So now here's another exercise. The deciding vote is yours. So it's time to elect the next world leader, and yours is the deciding vote. And these are all facts about the leaders. I'm going to ask you to cast your vote. I'm going to ask you to share it in the chat pod once you go through this. But candidate A associates with crooked politicians and works with astrologers. He has had 2 mistresses, chain smokes, and drinks a whole heck of a lot of martinis every day. Candidate A. Candidate B was ejected from office twice, sleeps until noon, used opium in college, and drinks a large amount of whiskey every evening. Candidate B. Candidate C. He is a decorated war hero. He's vegetarian. He doesn't smoke. He has an occasional beer here and there, and he hasn't had any extramarital affairs. So, if you wouldn't mind sharing, cast your vote in the chat pod. Who would you vote for? A, B, or C? And then I'm going to tell you who these people are. Candidate C, another C, another C, another C. Do I see a B? Yes. Jerry, thank you for the B. Someone just took my thunder. All right, I don't see anyone voting for A, but A is Franklin Roosevelt. Candidate B, those of you that watch, what's it called? The Queen, the Crown, right? Winston Churchill. And candidate C is Adolf Hitler. And by the way, if you said yes to the abortion, you just killed Beethoven. So interesting, right? So again, we're not about passing judgment. We all have different beliefs. We all have different value systems. But the point is, when you start to look at lousy leadership, it's not always black and white. There's some shades of gray that we're going to look at. So let's dive in and talk about leadership and just some warnings for today. Like I said before, we're all multifaceted. We all have different beliefs, value systems, uh, moral judgments are subjective. We're influenced by our upbringing, our families, our pressures that we have around us, and there are many shades of gray. And the invitation for today is to really explore and discuss and reflect. And like my goal is that you have a couple takeaways that you share for some of the other people that you want to support and help them grow and cultivate as leaders. So that's the warning for context, and all the PG-13 stuff is done right now. So we'll talk about leadership. So leadership, and you probably have your definition of leadership, and maybe it even started when you were talking through some of those great qualities that a leader did that you noticed in the past. But leadership really, it deals with ethical choices and decisions. We have to have a moral compass. There's communication skills, decision making, adaptability, delegation, strategic thinking. There's so many pieces and parts to leadership. And for those of you that are a little bit more visual, we have a word cloud that looks at leadership, like patience, motivation, aspiration, innovation. These are all pieces of leadership. And like I said, we've already talked a little bit about the business owner, individual contributor, who you are today. And we're going to spend some time now going through and painting a picture of the dark side. So anything that you say, I just ask that you just strip any names or companies or anything like that. And then whenever I do training, I always think of like the 4 C's: confidentiality, candor, collaboration, and cell phones. It just basically means we're all here. We'll be out of here in an hour. If you're able to help engage, share some of your learning, some of your questions and everything, that'll really help us. And I just want you to keep it real. And my personal agenda is, I said I'm writing a book. So if we talk about something that inspires you, or you're like, oh my gosh, I have this crazy story that happened to someone that I know, I would like to share that in the context of building better leaders in the future. I'll give you some information. I would welcome a quick phone call, or however you would feel comfortable sharing some stories, because I'm sure we all have some crazy stories. So today's leadership state is very, very different. If you think of how things were 10 years ago, it's so different now. We have a post-COVID remote workforce. People need to be flexible, adaptable, resilient. As leaders, whether you're an individual contributor leading yourself, leading a business, whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, whatever it would be, it's really important to focus on great leadership skills. One of the other things that pops up is leaders are being asked by their employees to be, and this is kind of an exaggeration, but a mental health professional. And basically, what that means is because everything is so integrated now, it's not just about you come to work and then you go home. When people are working for you, they're bringing in their problems, their challenges, the fight with their spouse, the problems with their dog or kids or whatever. And you as a leader have an opportunity on how do you want to work and how do you want to inspire your employees. So um, it's really important to be innovative. It's important to have heightened communication, and it's important to engage and support activities that really engage your employees. So last year I did a webinar, and I'm not going to talk too much about it, but it was a webinar with Score, and I have it at YouTube. You can watch the whole thing. But it basically, I did a research project on what are the top 10 leadership challenges and what do you do about it. So that was focused more on the good leadership. For today, we're going to focus on a little bit more of the lousy leadership. So here's the frame for today. I'm going to share with you a few stories. We'll talk about what's good, what's bad, and what are some of the lessons learned. So the way I like to open it up is if, let's say, we're all around a nice bonfire at night, and we're like, once upon a time, there was a lousy leader. And I would love one day for us all to be able to sit around the campfire and share our stories. But for today, we'll just be using Zoom. So let me tell you about one of my first lousy leader experiences. So I was 18, and I was working in telesales, and I was pretty good. And the way that we did our sales is we would have to make so many sales per hour per week to meet goals. We had goals that all the sales reps were working on. We also had personal goals. So I worked in a facility that was open until midnight, and basically from 11 to 12, we would call the Pacific Coast and call people and sell products and things like that. Well, I had a leader walk up to me. Let's call her Kim. And she's like, Michael, I need a favor. I'm like, okay, what? I would like you to go clock out, and then I want you to come back and work for the next hour. And we're not going to report the time that you worked, but if you get 2 sales in the next hour, not only are you going to get a lot of bonus this week, but you're going to make the program bonus for the week or hit our goal for the week and help everyone else that worked on the program. And I was 18, but something felt kind of weird about it. I did it. I went back. I love the kudos, the celebration, the applause of getting the program to goal and getting my bonus. But a couple days later, the VP walked up to me and she's like, "Have you ever been asked to clock out and work?" And my reaction was, okay, I got to be honest. I might lose my job. I didn't know if I did something wrong, but I said yes. And unfortunately, that leader was no longer with the organization a couple days later. So, what happened here? What was lousy? Well, she used her title as a manager to be influential or powerful. So, just the fact that you have a VP title, or you're a CEO, or you're a president, or you're whatever it is, that can put people in an uncomfortable position just by title alone. So she asked me to do something, and I don't know if I knew that if it was unethical, but actually it was illegal because you are not allowed to have hourly workers do work for you without paying them. So it was just kind of a very interesting situation that when I was putting these slides together a couple days ago, I'm like, gosh, that was really the first kind of place where I felt kind of icky and was asked to do something that I didn't feel comfortable doing. So let me just ask in the chat pod, any reactions to that? Anything that you think is interesting? Any lessons learned from my little activity? And I just wanted to kind of start with that. It's something simple, just to show what the frame for today is going to look like. So we'll talk about the story, what was lousy, and what some of the lessons are learned. And also, I saw some comments in the chat pod about the employee assistance program, which is great. That's a great if you need some help, or I think there's probably some other resources out there where you can call or email and let people know, hey, my boss just asked me to clock out and go get some sales. You know, something feels wrong. I want to report that. So, yeah, it's super important. And here's the thing, and this is super important, and I'll emphasize this a little bit more, but part of being a leader is to set the tone and the culture for people to talk about this kind of stuff. And what typically happens is we're so busy, we throw people in a room, we throw people on a project, we don't give them clear roles, we don't give them clear instructions, and as a result, it becomes a slippery slope, and that's when things get out of control. So going back to our definition about this legendary leader, I love this quote, and it's by Warren Bennis. A manager does things right, the leader does the right things. So, what is the difference between leadership and management? You probably already know this, but I just want to define. Leadership is more of influencing, inspiring, motivating, thinking strategically. Management is more planning, organizing, achieving the goals. So I always like to say you lead people and you manage things. I manage time, I manage attendance, I manage sales goals, whatever it might be. Leadership is about aspiring and guiding others towards a vision, while management is more about planning, organizing, and controlling resources. Excellent. So here, and this is not an exhausted list, but these are some characteristics of really good leadership, which I call legendary leadership. So my company is called L4 Learning Solutions. It stands for Lessons Learned from Lousy Leaders. But most of my work is executive coaching. And to be honest with you, I got a lot of pushback during my first couple of years. They're like, why would you ever, as a coach, talk about like bad leadership and horrible toxic people? And I actually kind of stumbled a little bit before I kind of got the momentum and the belief that by recognizing and acknowledging what is not good, what is lousy, we can actually self reflect, catch ourselves, catch others, be crystal clear of what we expect on others and what they should be doing so that they do not trip into this lousy mode. So, some of the characteristics: real, authentic, fair, inclusive. If there's anything else that you would like to add to the chat pod on some characteristics of legendary leaders, I would love to see that. A big one for me: transformational. So taking, oh, that's a really good one, George. Yeah, showing love, showing kindness, showing empathy. Those are all kind of related to that. Integrity is super important. Resilient is also good. Like as a leader, people are going to tick you off all the time. Are you going to go home and kick your dog and scream at your kids? Or can you be resilient and mature enough to get over it, to focus on what's really the important thing to you as a leader and to other people that follow you? Flexibility is good. Feedback is super, super important. Being patient. Yeah, yeah. So let's take a look at some lousy characteristics. Narcissistic, someone mentioned that before. Bullying, fear. I heard a story the other day that this employee, in working with all of her managers, was never really given clear feedback on what she needed to do to be more successful or to get to the next level. So it's taking time to be clear about not only what you recognize that's good, but feedback for improvement. So making sure that you focus on the positive side. So going back to the lousy side: angry, making empty promises like you'll always have a home in our company when you don't care for the employee, untruthful. So these are a lot of toxic behaviors that can happen. And what makes us lousy? I don't think anyone wakes up and says, you know what, I'm going to be a lousy leader today. it's just, gosh, I'm stressed out. I just need one more sale. If I could just stop the clock and get another sale, that's gonna just, I'm gonna be able to fill my tank up with gas or whatever you can do with the bonus. So it's these little things that really contribute, pressures from others, or a thing that I work with a lot in my coaching practice. Sometimes it's hard to say no. Sometimes we want to please others. So sometimes just not being able to say no can make us lousy leaders. Personal values might be weighted differently. Maybe you value money, maybe you value the applause, the fame. But it's all these things that we just have to take a moment and check ourselves and discover, is there anything that we can do to make us more of a legendary leader and less of a lousy leader? So one of the things I wanted to share with you, every now and then I do some LinkedIn posts and I try to make them, interesting and provocative. And I thought, it would be interesting to share a story from the movie Mean Girls. Can you type a yes in the chat pod if you've ever seen the movie? It was written by Tina Fey, one of my favorite comedians. And yeah, so here's a situation. So Regina is the lead character. I think that's her in the middle there. And it's basically all about clique leadership. So Mean Girls is all about Regina, who basically lacks empathy for anyone that's not in her circle. She makes fun of people. She compliments people to their face and then turns around and makes fun of them. She rules her high school with an iron fist using fear and intimidation. And the thing is, like, even though this is like a funny comedy movie, like this stuff happens in companies and organizations. So she lies, she cheats, she betrays her friends to get what she wants, and she's not held accountable for her actions. So when we talk about the type of power, it's basically like she's super popular. They call her part of the plastics, which is another kind of clicky term. But we'll talk about power bases in a little bit. But this is referent power, where she's like a role model. So someone's out to get her, and they make cuts in a T-shirt. And then the next day, all the females wear T-shirts, and they all have like holes in them because Regina did it. So it's just kind of an interesting example to think about lousy leadership, looking at Mean Girls, and it's actually from a book. I think it's called like Queen Bee or I don't know, something like that. But yeah. So like I said, this can be a slippery slope. And it all starts out with tiny little things, like everyone else is doing it. No one will find out. My boss told me to do it. My boss told me to clock out. It's not exactly illegal. Oh, we were in a hurry. We didn't have time to check it, or it won't hurt anyone. So it's just little things. If they're not monitored and caught, they can become really, really big challenges and really, really big problems. And like I said, no one is going to wake up, hopefully, no one's saying, I'm going to be a lousy leader, but, you know, you need some money, you need some power, you need some whatever it is, and little things go. I'll tell you another quick story. I know of a company where a HR executive created his own company, and then he would send bills from his own company to the main company that he worked with, and they basically paid out thousands, like over like $200,000 or $300,000 before they found it. And talk about something that was horribly unethical. Um, Another interesting story, going back to a long time ago when I started my career in a call center. I remember going to one of the supervisor's house, and I opened the drawer in his kitchen, and he had an entire cabinet full of coffee sugars and coffee creamers that basically he has stolen from work. So every time he goes into the break room, grabs a couple, there were like the big cylinders, and he like had a whole bunch of those. And it's like the slippery slope. It's like it starts with little things like that, that if we start to get away with it, or others that we should be supervising or paying more attention to, start to get ahead of things and start get away with things, then it can lead to this slippery slope. So we're talking about leadership, and I'm going to make a super quick point. This is a model. It's called dial-based leadership, and basically, you as a leader, you're going to have different requirements based on if you're expanding your organization or hiring people, or you need to unfortunately do a layoff or something. There's times when your leadership dials need to be calibrated a little bit differently. So, for example, there might be times where results are super important, but we also need to dial up developing people, because you can't do all the work yourself. You need to delegate so that you free up your time so that you can be more strategic. And the thought is, as you apply your leadership principles and practices, realize that there's times when you're going to have to dial things up a little bit higher than others and dial them down. So I teed this up a little bit. Let's look at power basis, and then we will do our second poll here in a moment. So there's different types of power, and I would encourage you to think back at that leader that was the lousy leader that you shared some of those characteristics in the chat pod. Um, did they use coercive power based on penalties or punishments? I'll give you a bonus if you do this. Have you seen leaders do reward power? Well, it's basically you get a reward if you do something valuable. There's legitimate power, which is more position power. I'm the CEO, I'm the policeman, I'm the cop, I'm the fireman, I'm the judge, whatever it would be. Then there's expert power, which is the opposite of legitimate power. And that's based on the person, not the position. So the person has knowledge, education, experience, training. They're considered the expert because they've been doing it for a long time, compared to if a cop pulls you over, you don't know if it's his first day or his 10-year anniversary, but he has that legitimate power just because of the title and his position. And then, like I talked about with Mean Girls, there's the referent power, which is admired as a strong leader or celebrity endorsement. So I'm going to ask Ramona if she can bring up our second poll. Which of these power bases have you seen the most? And you could probably, I'll ask you to pick one that you see the most. So just select one, not more than that. So do you find people that are coercive based on penalties? I'm gonna, do something mean to you. I'm not gonna approve your vacation. I'm gonna use physical force. Is it rewards where you do something valuable, you get a reward? Legitimate power, expert power, and these are related. And then the role model power, as I like to see. Okay, I see about 15 of you have done it. Give me 5 more and then we'll close the poll. So this coercive, reward, legitimate, expert. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and close the poll. It looks like the majority of you, and these changed a little bit. Okay. Someone got in right this last second. Okay. Okay, so I'm looking at poll 2. Which of the power bases have you seen the most? It looks like legitimate power, position power, not personal power. So interesting. And I would have to say I would respond the same way. And let's look at what was pretty close to that. In second place, my poll will cooperate with me. Coercive power using penalties or punishments, 33%. Uh, Interesting. Great. Good. Yes or no in the chat pod. Has anyone ever heard of the Stanford prison experiment? So actually, I'm a psychology major, and I heard of this years and years and years ago. And it wasn't until, okay, we got, looks like about 50-50. So this is fascinating. So the guy's name was Philip Zimbardo, and he is still alive today. But he did this experiment back in 1971, and this was at Stanford. And basically, what he did was he asked a series of students to participate in a prison simulation or prison experiment. And he asked the participants, would you like to be a prisoner or would you like to be a guard? So they met with everybody, they assigned them, and they tried to make it as authentic and real as they could. They actually sent the guards to arrest the people at their homes, took them into the basement of Stanford that was all set up like a jail. And they basically said, guards, your role is to make sure that your prisoners behave and don't do anything wrong. So the whole structure was very, very ambiguous, and there were not a lot of there wasn't a lot of clarity. And the whole time they're doing this experiment, they're watching video cameras of how they're doing it. But basically, the study's findings revealed how quickly and dramatically people can conform to social roles and how easy abuse of power can be in these situations. So these guards, which again, they were all students, as you can see in the picture, these guards would abuse their power. They would bully. They would not let people do homework that they said, oh, yeah, bring your homework. You can work while you're in jail. And basically, the guards started to do all these horrible, like making people do push-ups. So they actually did a movie, I think like about 10 years ago. I watched it over the weekend. So if you're interested to see the whole experiment, it's just so interesting. So it was just basically telling people that you are a person in authority, you are a guard. Over time, if left monitored and unregulated, the power will overcome the person in this social dynamic. And basically, the prisoners were depressed, they were crying. So it was a 2 week experiment. I think they stopped it after like 5 days or so. And it's just so much about human behavior and power and corruption and being ethical, can really be learned from this prison experiment. So they were abusive, sadistic. The prisoners were anxious. They locked the guy away because he didn't eat sausage. So he had cold sausages like for 2 days. It was just horrible, the stuff that they did. And there was no one that was overseeing them. So there's tons and tons and tons of lessons that we can unpack here. Okay, this one makes me gag a little bit. This is Jimmy Jones. Are you familiar with Jimmy Jones? Just a yes or a no. If you've ever heard the phrase "Don't drink the Kool-Aid," this is how it happens. So he basically organized a church with which many people say became a cult. It was called the People's Temple. And basically, fast forward to the end, he put cyanide in Kool-Aid and made over 900 people drink it to die because he told them that, I don't know if it was like heaven awaits, or he made these promises that basically resulted in babies and children drinking this punch. They found syringes there. And basically, until the September 11th attacks, the tragedy at Jimmy Jones, he basically took people from California and moved them over to Guyana, which is a remote country east of Venezuela, and he kept them all in a group. He would make announcements 24 hours telling everyone what to do. He basically brainwashed these people. He made them sign their valuables, their home over to the church because he's like, you shouldn't have anything material. But then at the same time, he had all these nice events and nice houses and cars and all that kind of stuff. He studied Hitler. He used to kill animals as a child, and then he would practice doing funerals. So this guy was a nut job. And in 1977, there was all this like suspicion and everything. He made everyone drink the Kool-Aid, and then someone actually shot and killed them. So he basically did all this by telling people that what he wanted, what they wanted to hear. So, for example, this is like in the 70s. There was a lot of racial divides, and he brought people of all colors, ethnicity, beliefs all together in this church, and it became this like very warm and friendly, loving environment. But overall, a lot of the experts are that Jones was all about manipulation and control and power, and the whole being nice was just something to kind of get people into his temple. And there were thousands that were part of this church. They used to bus people in to go to it. Um, so, what are the lessons that we learn? Lots and lots of lousy stuff here, but there's a lack of integrity and honesty. Jones was known for doing these rambling speeches just to confuse people. So, failing to communicate effectively. He would blame a lot of others and not take responsibility. So we see the blame and, I'm a victim, everyone else has a problem. He would create a negative or toxic work environment. He basically created this cult where there was so much fear and intimidation that he used that to control and manipulate all his followers. So it was very physical and a lot of psychological abuse. Failure to lead by example. Anything else that you have from your experience on Jimmy Jones? Kool-Aid. Um, is he from Clearwater? I don't know if he's from Clearwater. Maybe he is. But no, actually, he's from the Midwest, I think. He started a church in the Midwest, and then California was more progressive, so he moved it there. And then from there, he went to Guyana. And there is a movie. Yeah, there's a couple movies, there's some documentaries. It's really interesting. And I used to teach ethical leadership at Catholic University for grad school. And one of the movies that we would watch was this because there's so many really good connections to ethical leadership. So although it's a situation that is kind of old, there's so many lessons, and it still is very very timely today. So I encourage you to kind of check that out. So we've talked about the different types of power abuse. I want to talk about the different types of lousy leaders. And we have about a half hour left or so. And we have maybe 3 or 4 examples. And then I'll ask if you have any questions, go ahead and feel free to ask those in either the chat pod or the Q&A pod. And then we'll take some time at the end and do some questions if you have any. All right. So let's talk about types of lousy leaders. First of all, this is pretty basic, but incompetent. So it could be somebody took over a family business and they have no training or anything. They just don't know how to do it. They're not motivated and they do not have the ability. They're incompetent. Then we have rigid. They might be competent, but they choose not to make good decisions. So even when the data shows that things are black and white, they continue to push back. They're incredibly rigid. Then we have the intemperate, and this is lack of self control. Um, The example that comes to mind, does anyone remember Marion Barry? he was the he was the mayor of DC. So he cheated on his wife, took crack, went to jail, and then he was elected to city council. This is in 92. And then he was reelected as the mayor in 94. So it's kind of like a lack of self-control, enabled by no one just wants to intervene. They just let him be, crazy and do his own thing. Then we have callous, which is uncaring, unkind, corrupt. They lie, cheat, steal coffee creamers. Insular, they draw a boundary between their welfare and outsiders, like the Mean Girl scenario, where if you're not, part of the plastics or part of the HR group or the marketing group or the young professional group or whatever, then you're not part of a inclusive environment. um and then evil, pretty straightforward. They basically want to hurt others, and I saw a couple things that were going on. Uh, okay, keep it clean, people, keep it clean. All right, so those are some types of lousy leaders. So who do you think is the number one worst leader of all time? Any guesses? Someone mentioned it before early on. We've used his name before. Yes. Thank you, George. So it is Hitler. He is considered the lousiest leader, at least by some people, of them all. And it's actually pretty sad, the hate and the evil and the things that he got away with. But it's very interesting to look at like what happened. So, first of all, he was, of course, the central figure in the Holocaust. But let's look at his background. He was actually an artist, and he wanted to be an artist, but no one would buy his art. He tried to get into art school. They wouldn't let him. He didn't even get admitted to art school. He once lived in a homeless shelter. And I'm just giving some context and background. Like my philosophy as a coach is, it doesn't matter what happened in the past. Where are you now, and where do you want to go forward? But for this leadership profile, or lousy leadership profile, I thought it was kind of interesting at just to look at his background. So many were here's the thing. He was considered a very charismatic and an excellent public speaker. He called for a new German order to replace what he saw as incompetent and inefficient democratic regime. And we're not going to go into too much politics here, but he was known, of course, for abusing power, but he also was known as someone that was very inspirational and very motivational. And he would give, and this is interesting, he would give speeches to really get people to be more emotional, to really charge people up, to get them to be more enthusiastic, therefore convincing them that his decisions were based on what was good for Germany. And he used these inspirational speeches to basically say that Germany needed to be cleansed, which it was actually not a novel idea. He took it from the Egyptian culture. So, I mean, we've all heard horrible things that Hitler did, but the interesting thing is he used so many different facets of power to really gain control of an entire country, and he used so much fear and punishment and just all these negative toxic qualities. However, people said that he had incredible charisma, which is really interesting because if you look at the people that we've talked about before, Jimmy Jones, Hitler, like they have this incredible charisma, which if no one checks that, it can lead to some very toxic and hurtful, and just a lot of negative toxic results. So I had to throw this guy in since he has been on the news pretty much every day. Fun fact though, I want to go back to Hitler. I'm a big Netflix guy. There's like I don't know, it's called like conspiracy theories or something. And the thought is that he did not commit suicide. They found someone that looked like him and they, like, I guess killed that person, and Hitler like didn't die from suicide. So I don't know if you buy it, but I thought it was interesting. And going back to Hitler and Jones and even Charles Manson, who was another cult leader, they have this incredible charisma, which is just it's so interesting. And again, I just really believe that it's important to look at leadership from the good, the bad, the ugly, so that we can like figure out and keep ourselves in check and do the right things, be really good role models, and not abuse power. So speaking of abusing power, so here is Putin, and there's a lot of things that Putin was trying to do. He's been in power for over 2 decades. He was first prime minister and then president, and he has been able to get control over Russia's government by purging political opponents, centralizing power. He's controlling the media. The Russian people have been, like, some people see the positive that he's helping the economy, but he's using like one of the world's largest militaries, and he has access to nuclear power, and all this is just incredibly disturbing and crazy. And again, I just kind of throw his name into the hat of lousy leaders, just because he's getting away with so much. If you look at the lessons that we learn, authoritarianism, so a disregard for democratic principles, consolidating all this power and taking it into control of his own hands. If you look at lack of transparency, so he's not sharing the right information with the right people. He's been overly aggressive, of course, using aggressive military force to achieve what some people are saying are his personal goals. Corruption. He is becoming very wealthy the longer he's in power. And he's also very intolerant towards opposition. So I just want to pause for a second. We've talked a lot about leadership, ethical leadership, lousy leadership. I've given you some I guess case studies you could call, and I just want to see if there's anything that anyone wants to kind of bring up in the chat before we move, and we have one more example, and then we'll close things out. Creating chaos to rule. Thank you, Martha, for that. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. Let's make the environment so crazy so that we can come in and, tell people that we're making it a better place or trying to fix the problems that we're creating. That's so interesting. That's actually a really good point. I should add that to my model. All right. So I tried to organize this, and please, if you have any feedback, either after this or online, I'd love to get like just your reaction, what you thought was good, helpful, interesting, whatever. But I try to like layer it so that we go a little bit deeper. So we have ethics, morals, and values. Oh my, for you Wizard of Oz fans. So lousy leaders, again, we should all hopefully have a really clear working definition of this construct of lousy leadership. And it's just very dysfunctional, and it has all these crazy characteristics to it. So there's a moral and values part of it. So it's a standards of what's right and wrong. There's the ethics, which I like to say is more of the behaviors. So as a result of knowing the principles of right and wrong? How do you use this ethical compass, if you will, to determine what you do? Ethical leadership, I think it's a two-part process. It involves the personal and the moral behavior and the moral influence on others. So it's thinking about yourself, it's thinking about others, and how do you work to support, create expectations, give feedback, demonstrate those good leadership skills. So I have one more example, and I call this the mischievous Madoff. Um, so this was Bernie Madoff, and he was an American financer and an investment advisor, and he operated one of the largest Ponzi schemes in history. And for those of you that don't know what a Ponzi scheme is, it's basically taking money from an investor and then spending the money. And when another investor comes in, you take their money and you give it to the other guy. So basically, he was not investing anyone's money. He was just kind of moving it back and forth. So his whole scheme collapsed in 2008 when a whole bunch of his clients, and remember what happened around 2008, when a lot of his clients tried to take the money from their investments, he was unable to pay them. He basically pled guilty to 11 counts of fraud, including money laundering, perjury, theft. The sad part is he was sentenced to 150 years in prison. He didn't make it that long. He died in 2021 while he was serving his sentence. And I was watching, again, another, I think it was on Netflix, documentary about Bernie Madoff. And it was so interesting. He literally could not be wrong. He would rather lie than be wrong. And I thought, wow, talk about a warped sense of moral judgment. He had this strong desire where he needed to be correct all the time. And some people, you may associate that with perfectionism or perfectionistic tendencies, which is basically you're trying to be flawless and you have this fear of making mistakes. So if you think of the behavioral health part of it, like it's impossible to be perfectionistic. So I'm not very perfect today. So it's accompanied by these feelings of criticism and anxiety, and he was trying to do everything right. That it just eroded his mental health, his relationships, his performance, and as a result, he was known as being deceptive, greedy, manipulative, lack of empathy, arrogance. All these toxic qualities. But again, he would rather lie than be wrong. So that's the last example that I have. And for some reason, I lost my chat. Here it is. So based on that, are there any other lousy leaders that you want to throw their name in the ring? We won't talk about it today, but I'm just kind of curious if there's some that you were thinking of. And I'm trying to make this, not too politically charged. And there we go. So, okay. So Trump has been mentioned. Rob Ford, mayor of Toronto. Interesting. Okay. Sam Bankman Fried. I don't know him. But actually, I'm going to take a picture of this because I want to do a little research and maybe add that to the future if my camera will work here. Don't be using your phones during webinars, people. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. The FTX CEO. Yeah, it's so interesting. Just so interesting, this stuff. Think about Enron. We didn't really talk about Enron, but they told the world they had this streaming service even before Netflix, and they completely didn't have that. Okay, there we go. To balance out Trump, we have Biden. So I think that's fair. And I think there's lousy tendencies in both of them, I guess. So Ramona just popped up the poll. We still have about maybe 5 more minutes to go, but if you want to complete your poll, we'd love to get your feedback. So now that we talked about leadership, lousy leadership, I want to give you some tips like what can you do to make sure that this does not happen to you and give you some tools so that you can help other people continue to be legendary and not get trapped to this. So the summary here is, and I'm looking at the similarities between all these lousy leaders, in addition to the hurt and the fear and the intimidation. You can see narcissism. A lot of these people have very narcissistic tendencies, a sense of entitlement, a sense of self importance. They use fear and intimidation to get what they want, to control other people. They use verbal abuse. They don't take ownership. They focus on, it's all about them. That's narcissism, focused on personal goals. They're deceptive, ruthless, and unethical. And the consequences of this in the corporate setting, can be very severe, especially if we think about what Hitler did and how he was able to influence all these people. It's all about influence. So, who are the people that stayed strong over or during uncertainty? My favorite is Nelson Mandela, another great movie out there if you're movie watchers, about the stuff that he dealt with and the challenges and how he was just so positive and inspirational. I really, really respect Nelson Mandela. Winston Churchill, who we talked about earlier with his drinking, Leonardo da Vinci, and Steve Jobs. And I've heard mixed things on Steve Jobs. I don't know if you think he's a lousy leader or a legendary leader. From what I've heard, he was very, very innovative, but was not always the most effective leader in going about it. So, something to throw out and to think. So here's a really important slide, and then I'll give you some freebies here as I promised in the next slide. But really think about what are some of the tips that you have um, when you have to work with a lousy leader. And if it's someone you're managing, that's tough. If it's someone who's managing you, that's even more challenging. If you're in an organization or a startup, there's just so many variables. But and in the chat pod, I'd love to hear your comments and your ideas as well as to like how do you interact or how do you deal with these lousy leaders. One of the best things is self-reflection. So just taking time, reflect on your values, reflect on your priorities, reflect on your actions, and identify where you need improvement to take next steps. um, Another thing is ask for feedback. We all have blind spots. We all think we're a lot better than we actually are. Get feedback from your coworkers, your friends, your mentors. Foster a positive work environment. What can you do for your team? How can you collaborate? How can you make mistakes like a good thing? If you've heard of Juniper Network, they had this Mistake of the Month club where whoever made the biggest mistake each month would be acknowledged. There was a guy that plugged a cord in and brought down the whole internet network, and they gave him the award. And it sounds silly, but just changing and shifting the culture where, hey, we're all human. Let's be authentic. Let's admit our mistakes. It's super important. Communication, clearly communicate with others, listen, lead by example. The role model is really, really important. How can you expect other people to do things when you don't, walk the talk yourself? So be honest, be fair, be empathetic, and try to create a good environment. And finally, the last one I have is embrace humility. So as a leader, it's okay. You don't have to have all the answers all the time. You just have to be able to get them, be resourceful. So be open from learning from others and seeking help when you need it. And then finally, if you're interested in contacting me or you want some freebies, I do have a really cool communication assessment. It's 10 questions. It identifies your style and it helps you communicate more effectively with people. And maybe there's someone that you're just not seeing eye to eye with, and you're like, gosh, what do I need to do? You might get some insights from that. And there's also a free, it's called foolproof development. So it's how do you develop yourself? You can use it for others. And if you'd like to story swap and have a quick conversation, there's the link there. So I will open it up for questions. And Ramona, maybe you can help me moderate if there's any last minute questions.
Definitely. So at the moment, I'm not seeing any questions, but very, very conversational. I want to thank you guys so much for showing up tonight. Oh, there's one. Will the slides be sent out? Yes, I will be sending out. Let me repeat one more time. So the recording of tonight's webinar, everything that you've heard, will be sent to your email, as well as the slides that he presented. That will be sent out as well. So be on the lookout for that. It will be sent out within 24 hours of now. So be on the lookout for that. There is a poll that I launched. I want to know what you guys thought about this presentation, and let us know. We would really appreciate it. If you cannot find your poll, sometimes it disappears. Just go to the bottom of your Zoom. You'll see a button that says polls. You can click on it and let us know what you think. We have Rolando. He said, "What are the hardest leadership characteristics to learn or to mold?"
That's a good question. What do you guys think? Any guesses in the chat? I would have to, so I think it's resiliency, which is basically how quickly can you recover when you're wrong? How quickly can you recover when someone hurts you? How quickly can you recover when you see something unethical and it causes all these problems? So I would say it's the ability to become resilient. And the way that I look at it is, and it's all about emotional intelligence, or neuro leadership is another thing that's related to this. And basically, without going into too much detail, let's imagine that you have a bubble. 50% of the bubble is rational, and 50% of the bubble is emotional. And what happens is when bad things happen to us, we become very emotional, and that goes up to the top of the bubble, that there's no space that you can actually think and be rational. So the more that you can be resilient to get over things, to regroup, to say no to something so that you can say yes to things, I think that's the number one challenge of leaders today. Or I would say it's a top 5 challenge. But good question. Thank you for that.
Awesome. Let me see if there's any other questions. Well, Rolanda replied. He said, "I really relate. I really relate to that. Thanks."
Thank you, Rolando.
All right. Any other questions before we close? With closing, I just want to remind you guys for next steps. If you want to continue your search for knowledge, or go to our broward.score.org website, where we have other workshops and webinars, as well as, again, free mentoring and counseling services for your business. I did see a few of you guys posted in the chat that you guys are aspiring business owner, future business owners. So please go ahead and take advantage of that mentoring that you have. You also will receive these slides that has Michael's information on it. You can get in contact with Michael if needs be. You guys have a wonderful evening, and thank you so much for spending your Monday evening with us. Thank you, Michael, for being here. Wonderful presentation. Very, very interesting, and I learned a lot.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.